Hello everyone, it's Miss Redmond here. Welcome to lesson 4 of the reproduction topic. This one is called What Happens During Fetal Development. So it's all about what happens during pregnancy. If you haven't got one, please go and grab yourself a pen and a piece of paper so you can make notes. Here's the success criteria for this lesson. Feel free to pause the video and write those down. So gestation is the time between fertilization and birth. In humans, this is also called pregnancy. So you probably will have heard pregnancy, that's the everyday English word for when a woman is carrying a baby. But we also need to know the word gestation in science, because gestation applies to any species which carries the baby inside. Interesting fact, the gestation period in elephants is nearly 2 years as opposed to 9 months in humans. Okay, I'm going to give you quite a lot of detail on this PowerPoint, and then I'm going to give you a summary afterwards. So don't write down any notes on these slides. This is more detail than you need to know, but it's really interesting, and even this level of detail is barely scratching the surface of what happens during gestation. So 0 to 4 weeks, about 5 days after fertilization, the fertilized egg starts to divide and make more cells. So you have one cell, it just splits. It literally divides into 2, and then you've got 2 cells. Those 2 cells divide and make 4 cells. Those 4 cells divide and make 8 cells, and so on. These cells can become any type of specialized cell, and they're called stem cells. You may have heard that word in the news. At this point, the group of cells is called a blastocyst, and the blastocyst implants into the wall of the uterus. So we talked about this in the fertilization and implantation topic, right? So fertilization happens, the egg and the sperm nuclei fuse together and they get wafted down the oviduct by the cilia, and then when they get to the uterus, the ball of cells, which is at the moment called the blastocyst, implants into the wall of the uterus. 4 to 8 weeks. After about 4 weeks, the group of cells has some recognizable organisms and we call it an embryo. So we need to know this keyword, embryo. The embryo starts to make tiny movements of lips. The cheeks can sense touch and the eyes and ears are forming. So this is a diagram of what the embryo looks like at between 4 to 8 weeks. So you can see an eye there. I think this is an ear starting to develop. So it's definitely got some recognizable parts already, but it's still very, very tiny at this stage. Look at that, 7 to 10 millimeters, so it's less than a centimetre long at 4 weeks. The embryo is a group of cells formed from the fertilised egg, and that's what we call it for the first 8 weeks after fertilisation. The placenta is the organ inside the uterus which allows substances to pass between the blood of the mother and the fetus. We'll mention this in later slides. So it's sort of like a massive filter. So you have blood vessels from the fetus or the embryo within the placenta, and you have blood vessels from the mother within the placenta, and they don't mix together. The blood of the mother and the fetus are separate, but substances can pass through, and that's really, really important because the mother provides the fetus with oxygen and glucose to keep it alive, and the fetus produces waste products like water and carbon dioxide that it needs to get rid of. So the mother passes oxygen and glucose to the fetus, and the fetus passes carbon dioxide and water to the mother to get rid of it. Unfortunately, other substances can pass through as well, like alcohol. That's why women are advised to reduce their alcohol consumption during pregnancy, and some of the chemicals in cigarette smoke can also pass through the placenta, so mothers are also advised to stop smoking. And some viruses can pass across the placenta as well. I'm not sure if the coronavirus can. It's a very new virus, so we might not know about that yet. But yeah, listen, these slides are probably going to bring up loads of questions. In fact, all of the lessons in the reproduction topic. So if you've got any questions, please email your science teacher or talk to them in lessons. Okay, the umbilical cord is the cord that connects the fetus to the placenta, and it's attached to the navel, the tummy button. So you've got a beautiful picture here. You can't quite see where it's attached, and you can't on there either. So at one end it's attached to the baby at the tummy button, and at the other end it's attached to the placenta, and it's full of blood vessels. So this is how the nutrients and the oxygen from the mother travel to the baby, and this is how the waste products get from the baby to the placenta, and then the mother's body can get rid of them. This umbilical cord has become knotted during pregnancy, but that's not usually a problem. And the umbilical cord gets cut at birth, and then it falls off on its own. Okay, the fluid sac. You probably will have heard amniotic sac or amniotic fluid, but you don't officially need to know this word amniotic. It's good enough for you to know it as the fluid sac. And this is a sac, or like a bag, around the baby that's filled with liquid. So the liquid is there to act like a shock absorber for any bumps that might happen during pregnancy. So this is quite a new embryo inside its fluid sac. You can see the umbilical cord there, attaching it to the placenta up here. And this baby, this is really unusual. They've actually been born inside their fluid sac still. Absolutely amazing. So this is the umbilical cord up here. This baby's absolutely fine, by the way. It's not a problem for the baby to be born still inside the sac. I think it's probably only happens during C-sections, but there might be some very unusual births, vaginal births, where they still have the fluid sac around them. So this is the umbilical cord. It's attached at the belly button, somewhere in here, but it's quite long, and it's snaking past the baby's face, and then you can see how curled up the baby has to be while it's still inside the mother's body. So they really are curled up while they're in there, and then after birth, gradually they sort of relax and stretch out. Okay, from 8 to 12 weeks, from 8 weeks until birth, the group of cells is called a fetus. So officially we don't call it a baby until after it's born. It's a fetus at this stage. The muscles of the fetus develop, and it kicks, sucks and swallows. So when you hear women talking about the baby kicking, that's the fetus moving around inside the uterus, and you can feel that. You can even see it sometimes if the fetus is quite vigorous. The baby practices breathing. It draws amniotic fluid into its lungs and pushes it out again. At week 9, the sex organs start to look different in girls and boys. So this is a question that we often get asked, is when do girls and boys start to develop differently? And it's around 9 weeks. So the fetus is a group of cells that develops from the fertilized egg, and it's called a fetus from 8 weeks until birth. So it's a fertilized egg, and then we call it an embryo, then we call it a fetus, and after birth the fetus is a baby human being. At 12 to 20 weeks, the brain is starting to develop the areas that will process information from the eyes and ears. So although the fetus already had eyes and ears, the brain was not processing that information until now. So at this stage, the baby's starting to grow hair on its head and may start to suck its thumb, and the mother may start to feel the fetus moving. That's different for every single pregnant person. It depends on lots of different factors. That's it. From 20 to 30 weeks, the fetus starts to lay down fat. It swallows amniotic fluid and urinates to get rid of waste, but it doesn't do poos. The fetus, or rather the baby's first poo, happens after it's been born. At 24 weeks, the fetus is considered viable because it could survive if it was born at this stage. If the baby's born before 24 weeks, it's very, very unlikely that it's going to survive. At 26 weeks, the fetus can start to distinguish different voices. So it can hear inside the uterus, and it can even it can tell different people's voices apart. The testes descend during this time in boys. So apologies for the vernacular, but if you've heard people talking about balls dropping, that usually happens during pregnancy, so while the fetus is still in the uterus. And then during this time, the baby's skeleton hardens, changing from cartilage to bone. So before now, the baby's bones were quite flexible, and they're now starting to harden, most of them. At 30 to 40 weeks, the food that the mother eats can give the amniotic fluid different tastes and smells, and the fetus is now able to detect them. The fetus will probably start to turn head down at this stage. They don't always, and that can cause issues. The plates of the skull are still separate and will fuse together to form a fixed joint during the first 3 years after birth. So it's really important that the skull is able to be a bit flexible so that the fetus can actually get through the pelvis and get through the vagina and actually be born. At 37 weeks, the fetus is considered full term and could be born at any time. So if the fetus is born before 37 weeks, we call that premature. Anything from 37 weeks to 41 weeks is called full term. Okay, this GIF is showing you really quickly how the fetus develops inside the uterus, and I wanted to draw your attention to this one because you can see what happens to the woman's digestive system and lungs. So very early stages of pregnancy, she's got all of this space for her digestive system, but as the baby grows, that gets squashed up to this tiny space up here, and likewise with the lungs. Before pregnancy, they've got all of this space to expand into, but at the later stages of pregnancy, they're quite squashed up. So that's why pregnant women need to eat very small meals, but they need to eat more often because they obviously need lots of nutrients to keep this baby, to support this baby. And that's why pregnant women sometimes get out of breath as well, because their lungs physically don't have the space to expand into. So here's a summary of the development of the fetus. So week 1, cells begin to specialise and the fetus is under 1 millimetre long. Week 4, the spine and brain are forming, the heart is beating, the fetus is 3 millimetres long. Week 9, tiny movements of the lips, the cheeks can sense touch, the eyes and ears are forming and the fetus is 30 centimetres long. Week 12, muscles develop and start to kick, suck and swallow. The fetus breathes fluid and the fetus is 70 millimetres long. And week 37 to 42, sometime in that period, the fetus is born and the baby is 500 millimetres long. So that all of these things are the general pattern of what happens. It's different for every pregnancy, every baby, every woman. Okay, but that's the general picture, and you've got a series of diagrams up here as well. So feel free to pause the video and write this summary information down. Okay, here's your summary keywords. Gestation is the time between fertilization and birth. In humans, this is also called pregnancy. The embryo is the group of cells made from the fertilized egg, and it's called an embryo for the first 8 weeks. The fetus is the group of cells from 8 weeks until birth. The placenta is the organ inside the uterus that allows substances to pass between the blood of the mother and the blood of the fetus. The umbilical cord is the cord that connects the fetus to the placenta. The fluid sac We probably know it as the amniotic sac, is the sac around the baby which is filled with fluid and it protects it from little bumps that it might get. I strongly suggest you pause the video and write that summary down because these keywords are really important. Thank you very much for listening. I will speak to you next time.